seeding questions here. So, Sonny, you said you had a seeding question. Why don't you start us off?
Yeah, I'm just curious. Like, obviously, Wisconsin was battling for the top spot in the Big Ten in the first half of the season. And even after they fell behind Purdue, they were still talking about finishing second. And they've just been on a free fall lately, essentially since the month of February started. What's the floor for how far Wisconsin could possibly still fall in the tournament, you think?
Good question, Sonny. It's probably about a 10 seed. I don't think they're not gonna send him a Dayton because, again, if they just shut the water off and didn't win any more games, that's still 12 quad 1, quad 2 wins, which is just significantly more than other bubble teams. Probably about a 10 seed. Keep in mind, 3 weeks ago when the committee revealed their kind of top 16 teams, Wisconsin was in that. They were 4 seed. So I think the ceiling for them is probably the top tier of a 7, and in the basement's probably about a 10.
So if we look at teams like Nebraska, Iowa, teams like them that are kind of on the fringe, we talked about them a little bit and their chances to get in. If Nebraska, say they do go on a run and they win, their last game against Michigan and then maybe a game or two in the Big Ten tournament. I know you said the Big Ten tournament doesn't depend on or doesn't determine a lot of seeding, but where do you see kind of the floor and the ceiling of Nebraska and Iowa's seeds in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, Nebraska is probably between an 8 and 10. If everything broke right, maybe a 7 seed, but again, they're held back by non-conference. Some wins away from home will help, but probably an 8 to 10 range for Nebraska. Iowa, just try to get in, right? They're not going to find a path towards being much better than an 11 seed. Everything broke right, maybe a 10, the back end of the 10 line, but probably an 11 seed. Iowa's fans just be happy if you can kind of sneak in. And, Northwestern is in a similar boat to Nebraska, right? They've kind of trailed, in a lot of ways, kind of, followed each other around, and it depends which one you kind of prefer. But I think Northwestern's slightly ahead of Nebraska because they've had a little bit more success on the road, not much, but a little bit more. And they got the Purdue win. Obviously Nebraska does too, but I think they're in that same range of that, 7 to 10 range, probably closer to a 9 for Northwestern.
Yeah. Another team I was going to ask about is Michigan State. So, they're seeding right now. I just saw them on your chart, but where do you have Michigan State at right now? And where's the kind of the floor and the ceiling for them?
Yeah, that win probably puts them back towards the back end of the 9 line. I think in the end, Michigan State ends up in as an 8 seed. Like if you had to put money down on it right now, I'd say an 8 seed. There's absolutely a possibility that they could look pretty good and bump their seed up a little bit to get to a 7 line, but they have not played well enough. There's usually a line of demarcation in that 5-6 range. Those teams are not bubble teams. Those teams were never bubble teams in the last month. Michigan State has been, to be really honest. And so that's when you get into that, 7-8 range.
Now, Jason, if Illinois had beaten Purdue yesterday, I think there was room for Illinois to possibly, with a good showing in the tournament, jump up to a number 3 seed. But I don't think that's going to happen anymore. And for the most part, everything that I've been looking at, it sounds like we're probably sitting pretty comfortably at the number 4 line. Is that how you see it as well? Or do you think if we lose to Purdue on Sunday, lose in our first matchup in the Big Ten tournament, that there's still a chance that, we might fall to 5 or maybe even worse than that?
I think you meant lose to Iowa, right?
Oh, who did I say? Yeah, I meant Purdue. To say lose to Iowa in the. Okay, yeah, it's on my mind.
Sorry,
he's still thinking about Matt Painter and co.
That classy bunch. Yep.
I think there's a high probability you stay at the 4. For example, if you're an Illinois fan, as crazy as it sounds, Alabama games matter to you. San Diego State games matter to you. Kind of clearing the deck. Auburn games matter to you. Sometimes it's what happens around you, and you look around, and if you just kind of take care of your own business or just win one, lose one, you can kind of stay where you are. I'd say probably about a 70% chance you end up at a 4 seed and maybe a 30% chance at a 5. I don't really see you dropping into a 6 just because you've been so consistent and you have Shannon back. So I think you're going to be in that 4 or 5 range. I will say this, statistically, there's a kind of a double digit win percentage. I think it's around 15 or 20% more being a 4 seed winning your first game in the NCAA tournament. I think it's about 15% as opposed to being the 5 seed. when you're dealing with those 12 seeds and there are absolutely 12 seeds going to be in this tournament that can win games. You're talking about, Princeton and Grand Canyon and some of these teams that can really score. Grand Canyon already beat San Diego State. You want to try to push out to that 13 seed and deal with, some of the other teams. So there is a significant difference historically between 4 seeds and 5 seeds. So it does matter, that line.
Now, Jason, I know the playing game is for some of the 11 seeds and that whole situation. Do you have any insight on how the committee selects who are in those playing games and how those things operate? Do you predict who's in the playing games? Just any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we do our best to try to predict it. As of now, it's almost the Big East Invitational. You could almost take the Big East teams, whether it's Seton Hall, who, won tonight against Nova as a big win, Seton Hall, Villanova, St. John's, Providence, right? Those are all right around that cut line. But yeah, we try to do our best to predict who's going there. They do their best to try to keep teams in the same conference away from each other. They say that's okay, and that if it happens that way on the seed line, then you have to go play each other in Dayton again. But I doubt they're gonna do that. But one of the really interesting things, as a side note, when you're doing the research and pouring through this, is they could absolutely put St. John's against New Mexico and the Patinos against each other. They're absolutely right near each other, which would kind of be a crazy March Madness thing to have. But yeah, we do our best to try to predict who's coming there. But again, what they typically do is they search for teams, that major conference teams, that you better have played somebody. If you're take a look at non-conference strength of schedule, and in the end, they will deduct you if you don't play, and they will reward you if you do. And then they try to take one team in that first 4 that's not a major conference and bring them to give them a shot. Now, not necessarily Cinderella, but oftentimes a Mountain West school or a team from the non-Power 5 to bring in to add to that 4.
You brought up the Mountain West. I've had some gripes this year because I see everybody saying the Mountain West is going to get like 6 teams in and the Big Ten is going to get 5 teams in. I just, for the life of me, I cannot imagine the Mountain West getting more teams in the NCAA tournament than the Big Ten. Maybe I'm biased. I probably am. But I mean, what is it with the Mountain West this year that like people are saying that it's very possible they could get more teams in than the Big Ten? Are their numbers just that good? Because our strength of schedule, I don't think is all that great other than playing each other. What are your thoughts there in comparison to the Big Ten?
I tell you what, if you've been kind of a hoops junkie and stayed up late at night to watch their games, it's been worth it. They have a lot of really good teams, a lot of really, really good teams. And a lot of transfers kind of go to that league, right? If you're not playing, 20, 30 minutes in a high conference, you kind of slide to that league. And it's a really nice kind of place to get a lot of minutes and play some major games. Utah State, Boise State, there's some really, really good teams. Isaiah Stevens is one of the best point guards in the country for Colorado State. He single-handedly beat Creighton early November. I'm going to disagree with you in a sense that they deserve 6 bids. When you watch those teams play, when you look at the metrics, when you look at the wins, when you look at the quality of record and some of the games they won in the non-conference, they deserve those bids. So I think it's going to be a 5-bid league for sure. New Mexico is going to be right on the cut line. UNLV is trying to make up ground late. I think, it's going to be a 5 or 6 bid league, and I think it's deservedly so.
Interesting. I'll be interested to see Mountain West teams play. I do this podcast, and after I'm done with the podcast, I typically am editing videos and doing all that stuff. Yeah. So I don't always get time to watch the Mountain West team. But maybe I'll try to flip them on. Sonny, sorry to interrupt you. It's been the most entertaining conference to watch of all of them, to be honest. Really?
Yeah, it's been some really, really good games. Like Alfred's, coaching Nevada now, who's fantastic. They're a fantastic team with a lot of good veterans. It's a safe haven for a lot of veteran players from major conferences. And so you get this experience out there, and these teams can play. It'll be really interesting to see, how they fare in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sonny, you got anything?
Yeah, a final question, Jason. Like, obviously, the Big Ten as a conference hasn't exactly performed very well in this tournament. We haven't won a national title in a very, very long time. we have Purdue, the juggernaut, and then we have Illinois, who I think is a good team. I'll even say on some nights a very good team. How many teams do you think have the potential, or is it just Purdue to actually make a legit Final Four run, strictly from the Big Ten?
I think 3 teams. I think Purdue, Illinois, and you have to give credence to Michigan State. Between Tom Izzo and just the pedigree of some of these players. And again, I know they haven't played real well necessarily all year, but there's a lot of backing here that says these players have a chance to be excellent at times, especially if they shoot the ball pretty well from the perimeter. I think those 3 teams, when you dig into the metrics and you dig into the numbers, I'll give you this kind of piece of advice. If you're listening and want to fill out a bracket, if you make your way to Ken Palm, right, and you kind of look at just really, you don't have to subscribe. It's wonderful stuff. I will say this. If a team has an offensive or defensive efficiency that's over 50 throughout the last 20 years, only 6% of the teams have made it. So 94% of the teams that show up in a Final Four have an offense or defensive efficiency under 50. So that's a little bit of a red flag for Illinois. They've got to get that number down and down quickly, because typically you've got to do both sides of the ball, because, whether it's the referee whistle and those types of things, you get into high scoring, low scoring games, you got to be able to kind of play both offense and defense and lean on both at times. And so that's a really big thing. Miami was a blip in that last year with a really poor defense, but they shot the ball so well with their perimeter. But I think Michigan State, Purdue, and Illinois all can make a Final Four run.
Interesting. Jason, I didn't write this question down, but you just feel like you know your stuff so well. I'm just honestly curious your thoughts here. So obviously last year we had San Diego State, Florida Atlantic, kind of like the Cinderellas that, which, people can argue about Cinderellas have to be double digit seeds or whatever, but in my mind, they're Cinderellas. Are there any, teams like a Florida Atlantic, like a San Diego State, non-power 5, quote unquote schools that you're looking at this year? I'm sure Indiana State is probably one, some of those guys where you're like, hey, if you're filling out your bracket, take some extra time looking at this team, because this team, they could make their way in the Sweet 16, Elite 8, something like that.
Yeah, good question, JR. You mentioned Indiana State. They're the best shooting team in the country. When you play people that can get buckets, especially early on in an NCAA tournament game, and you fall behind and you're a high seed, you feel the weight and the pressure of the game. Purdue felt it last year. And when you feel that, you are not as confident playing. So Indiana State can really put pressure on you. Drake. So 2 Missouri Valley, teams. Drake's a really, really good team. They're the 38, top 40 team in the country offensively. They've already beat Nevada this year. So Drake's dangerous. And then kind of a fun one, McNeese State. So it's the Will Wade redemption tour, right? He got kicked out of LSU, sat out for a little bit. And now McNeese State is another really good 3-point shooting team. Let's throw in Samford as well, right? Samford, the Bulldogs, they're the 5th best 3-point shooting team. So, Samford and McNeese State, they take the ball down the court. They're going to shoot a bunch of threes. They're going to make a bunch of threes. And if that number gets around 13 or 14 threes made in a game, you're going to get beat. And so those, McNeese and Samford would be kind of 2 Cinderellas potentially.
So that's a metric you look at a lot for that, is kind of the shooting, 3-point shooting, stuff like that, in order to make it far in the tournament if they're a little bit of an underdog team.
Yeah. You want to keep an eye on, the perimeter shooting of that team. And then you just want to make sure that there's enough defensive metrics in there that they can get a few stops, here and there. Right. But, if you're a high major team and you're playing in the tournament, what's your fear? Your fear is that someone's going to come out and make 15 threes, right? Like that's the fear. And those teams do that on a regular basis. So if they play within their system, they're going to get some confidence, especially early in the game. If they see the ball go in the hoop, then they're going to create some havoc in the bracket.
Yeah. Michael has a good question here. He says, so obviously Purdue, UConn, Houston were some of the 1 seeds we talked about, but he said, who's Jason's 4th number 1? Is it Tennessee or North Carolina? I'm leaning Tennessee. Where do you fall, Jason?
Michael, I agree with you. I'm going Tennessee as well. As of now, I think it's Tennessee. Arizona's close. UNC's maybe, just slightly after that. But I think Tennessee's body of work has been really, really good. A sweep of Alabama. They beat Auburn, They got Illinois, Kentucky on the road, Wisconsin on the road. Tennessee's really, really quality team. Their metrics say they're really good offensively and defensively. So I'd go with them. The big difference with Tennessee this year is they've relied so heavily on defense over the last 3 or 4 years under Rick Barnes, who's a fantastic coach. But they offensively at times they would just get so stagnant. Insert Northern Colorado transfer Dalton Connect, who's probably the second best player in the country this year, and they've really been able to score the ball at a higher clip. If you can outscore Alabama, then you're doing something right. So I'd go Tennessee is the fourth number one. They're gonna be really dangerous because they're a little more balanced this year.
Do you think Tennessee has that pretty well locked in, unless something happens in the NCAA or the SEC tournament? Or
I don't think it's locked in. I think as we mentioned in the chat, by Michael, I think that Arizona has a chance and UNC has a chance. I think after that, it's kind of the cutoff. Baylor fans or Marquette fans might say, what about us? But I think it's probably down to those three teams: Tennessee, Arizona, and UNC.
Makes sense. Sonny, you got more questions before we get out of here?
No, I learned a lot, Jason. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Jason. Why don't you tell people where they can find you at one more time before we get out of here?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Big Underdog Blog, or you can go to my website, Big-Underdog.
Listen to the Big Ten Huddle. Please do like and subscribe. We appreciate that. If this was your first time listening, we are the Big Ten Huddle. We cover all things Big Ten football and basketball. We have a long episode every Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, all at 9 o'clock. So come in, check us out, get in the chat, let us know what you're thinking. We would love to have you join us and learn more about the Big Ten.